Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox with another episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I'm extremely pleased to have Eddie Cogan, the President and CEO of Catelas Software, visiting with me today about one of the, what I think is more fabulous tools that are available for the compliance practitioner in putting together a best practices compliance program. I can't exactly remember how I stumbled upon Catelas, but when I did, I got a demonstration of the software and I just went, wow. I used to be a software lawyer, and when you have something that all you can say is wow, that means it's a very, very powerful tool in however you choose to use it. And I'm going to ask Eddie to talk about the software in a minute, but what I would like the listeners to think about as Eddie describes not only the software that he can deploy, but the journey that the company has made and how it came up with the idea and how it's moved this software forward, and I've seen it evolve certainly over the past 18 months. So with that, Eddie, why don't you tell us, first of all, I think the listeners are going to know that you're not from Texas when they hear you speak. So how did you get here, and what got you to develop and market Catelas software?
Well, thanks very much, Tom. Yes, I'm originally from Ireland, and I've been living in the U.S. now for 12 years, and actually recently became a U.S. citizen. So I'm calling America my home now.
Excellent. So tell us about
So,
your journey to develop this software product.
yes, so I mean, I spent many years in e-discovery and investigations in the forensic world, and the idea there was to develop more and more sophisticated search engines to try to find the needle in the haystack. And clearly, with the evolution not just of more communications and more data, but the extension of those across multimedia and social media means that trying to make a better mousetrap really is not the answer. So I took a step back and said, is there another way of approaching this? And what we invested in 6-7 years ago now, when we founded Catelas, is to look at different ways of filtering down content, not just using keywords. And the idea was, people who commit fraud or bribery or who steal information and create these collaborative groups, they all know each other pretty well. So the premise was, could you look at large volumes of communications data and uncover the key relationships within that really represent how a company does business? Because those key friendships and relationships really uncover for you, the connectivity that people have, the trust that people have to get stuff done, good stuff and potentially bad stuff. So we got our patents, and we launched technology primarily originally in the investigative world. And we've now done, I'd say, almost 500 plus investigations were used extensively globally by the likes of Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, corporations such as Tyco, who use us heavily in FCPA. And I think probably the pinnacle of our success in investigations came recently when the FBI invited us to speak at the global cyber terrorism event in New York recently. So that's really where we began. And the idea there was to first find the people and the connections that matter, and then within that reduce corpus, then to begin to focus on the content that you are most interested in. And what we're able to do now in investigations is to pretty much uncover key evidence and key data within 24 hours of any investigation, which is really almost 1/10 the time it would normally take using keywords and all the rest of it. And the report that we generate really helps counsel and security and compliance understand their risks more quickly. And to your point in terms of detection and prevention and how the company evolved, we've had so much experience looking at the typical behaviors associated with fraud and insider trading and bribery and conflicts of interest and IP theft, that really there are behavioral signatures associated with this. And what we found is that change in relationships and change in behavior is a leading indicator of risk. And if you can deploy that in risk monitoring and risk oversight, you can help enrich existing compliance programs and make them, in a sense, more risk-based, and help them uncover risk before it becomes a problem, before you get to the point where you have actually bribery, because by then you have not just the business and operational problems, but you have tremendous regulatory issues at that stage. But if you can uncover breaches in policy, IP theft, fraud, conflicts of interest, ex-employees working for partners, all these sorts of things, if you can uncover them early and gain more control over that environment, you can considerably reduce your risk profile. I mean, I don't think you can get rid of risk completely, but you can considerably reduce it. And even maybe equally important, you have a degree of robustness in your compliance program whereby if the regulators, ask you, you can demonstrate that not only did you have a program in place, but the program was dynamic. And as things changed, your program and what you did and how you conducted your assessments were changed by how your company actually did business. And that feedback loop, I think, is probably what I would call the beginning of the next generation of compliance software, which is not just driven from the center out, but also driven from the extremities of your business back in.
You've said a couple of interesting things I'd like to follow up on, Eddie. First of all, I think last week I had Patrick Taylor, who's the president of Oversight Systems, which is a transaction monitoring software. And he talked about his company's journey to the compliance arena, also beginning or coming from a fraud perspective. You also mentioned coming from a fraud perspective. I'm not sure most compliance practitioners would see the link between fraud and corruption. Is that something that you could explain to them in terms of the relationship monitoring that Catelas can do?
Yeah, so I think it's fascinating because what's extraordinary about many of the regulatory fines and events that have taken place over the last couple of years is you really realize that companies often, it's not always the case, but companies often don't commit the problem, it's people do. And often people commit these bribes and they're earning maybe $10,000. I mean, it's not a lot of money. But the fine to the corporation could be 100 million, 30 million, and even more in terms of increased compliance costs. So what you're finding is that people just don't get it overseas. They don't get the importance of behaving in a certain way, and they don't see the difference between fraud, conflict of interest, vendor kickback, or bribery. For them, it's all the same. They earn a little bit of extra money here and there, which complements their base salary. So what you have is a cultural gap. And what you've got to do is to uncover all these breaches of policy early so that you change the cultural behavior of your company. And then you reduce the occurrence of these behaviors to a minimum. So I think people who understand fraud, like the conversation you had last week, do get a good understanding of indicative behaviors that if you get on top of them early, the consequences to your company is minimal. But these behaviors, as far as the perpetrator is concerned, are identical to bribery. But bribery for you has far greater short-term and long-term repercussions to your company.
You also just mentioned, once again, the relationship nature of the software monitoring. Could you explain in a little bit more detail how this particular software tool really focuses on the relationships between people?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, take a simple example of an employee who's about to depart your company. Most employees, before they depart, their behavior changes in terms of how they work, in terms of kind of information they collect and how they pass that information on. So you have a behavioral signature change. So the software can actually predict when an employee will leave a company 2 months before they resign. So scale that to a grander scale, and perhaps one of the things I didn't mention is one of the things Catelas also does, it taps into the Exchange servers without integrating with them and looks at the log files of every Exchange server globally. And the log files really are like a telephone bill. They tell you who emailed who and when. That's all they tell you. There's no content, there are no attachments, there are no privacy issues. But what it allows us to do is, and we deploy in most large corporations within a single day, and we're live that quickly. It allows us to pull this metadata in and create, in a sense, a Google map across the entire company, and allows us to understand all the relationships between your company and every single third party in every single region around the world. Now, what you find is that the relationship signature between all your employees who communicate, let's say, with a particular third party, the relationship signature changes as business activity changes. So in other words, let's say you're about to sign up a new partner and drive a couple $1 million through that reseller. We will know that's going to happen through the Catelas relationship monitoring 4 to 6 months before it actually comes on the compliance officer's desk, because we will see the relationship interactivity, the behavior change. And it isn't the volume of email that changes, it's the behavior of people and how they interact with each other when they're about to do business. So if you look at that, you can, clearly when you onboard new partners, we work heavily with companies there to really uncover risk at that stage before you onboard the third party, because not only when you ask the company to fill in a form and they tell you who's on the board, we automatically tell you who on the ground is working with your people in that company. And we have that list of names which you can do a background check on. You can check out, are any of them former employees and are they all certified? But once you've onboarded that third party, then 6 months from now, has the risk score changed? Has the risk profile of that company changed? And today, there's no way of monitoring that. There's no way to say that, hey, there are 5 new people in your company now handling that account. Those people haven't been trained. There are the third party you work with actually acquired another company and assigned new people to work with you. They're not certified. In fact, 3 of them have been to prison. You don't know that. We automatically detect that stuff. So we detect 2 things. What changes in terms of the people on the ground, their relationships, who they are, and we integrate with other systems so we know whether they're certified and trained. But we can also tell you if a company that was ranked number 30 in your list of companies, let's say in China, suddenly becomes number 5. And it becomes number 5 because your people are working with that company to bring in a lot more business, but you don't know it yet. And you're going to know it maybe 2 days before the quarter end. When you're under pressure to get things working, well, you don't realize that stage, the risk profile has already changed. You've now transacted new deals and you crossed the line. You can't go back then. So what you want to do is to understand these changes in a timely manner so you can action them, whether they're small level, in other words, is everybody trained, the block and tackle, or whether it's larger level. This company is now becoming way more serious from a transactional perspective. Are you aware before that transaction is consummated whether or not the risk profile of that partner has changed? This is valuable to you only if you know about it before the transaction. And that's what our software does, because it bottoms up that stuff and creates alerts, and it changes your risk profile dashboard so the compliance officer knows where they should spend their time, and they don't spend their time on things that haven't changed. So it's very much a risk-based way of automating a lot of the oversight and monitoring that you need to have, in a sense, to reduce the number of investigations you end up in.
A couple of times now you've said that the software has evolved to more, you've used 2 words, predictive and interpretive. Do you explain how you were able to develop an interpretive component to what I think most people would just see as a monitoring software tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's key, and we continue to evolve. I mean, I'm an engineer by training, and we spent many years investigating before we decided to become predictive and become monitoring, because you have to see things working before you can say how accurate is the model, because otherwise a model is just a model. So we're very confident now that our predictive models are very accurate in terms of predicting individual risk, people risk, and company level risk and region level risk. But the next step that we're doing also, and we're doing this now in financial services where we work with trade surveillance systems, and we're also doing it in the bribery and fraud world, is we're beginning to integrate with other systems out there as well, where like the colleague you spoke with last week, where events happen, whether they be transactions, whether they be deal software, or whether they be trades in the financial services. These events happen and they have a risk signature. So what we're allowing compliance to do is marry that risk signature also with the relationship behavior and create a triage effect, so we can bubble up to the compliance officer what are the most serious risks at any moment in time and which ones are the more junior risks. And some people say, well, you should treat all risks equally and look at them all, but the reality is you don't have time and effort, and systems are too disjointed. So what we're trying to do is integrate these systems together and bring together the value that comes from event tracking and transactional software like your last week's interview had, and also the relationship stuff. So that's going to bring monitoring and predictive behavior I think, to the next level where you start to integrate not on who people are and what they do, but also what they say and when they said it and what transactions and commercial events surrounded those kinds of behaviors. I think once we get that up and running over the next 18 months, I think we're going to have a whole new generation of software out there for the compliance world.
You've described generally how this particular tool can assist a compliance officer in being a little bit more nimble, being able to respond more quickly, but also to give them the ability to bring resources to bear when an issue comes up. And one of the things that I try to advocate to people is the Department of Justice wants to see you have some type of plan and moving forward to basically manage the risk as you've laid out in your plan. Does this tool help people with a forward-looking perspective as well, in addition to your retrospective look back, obviously, at things that have happened?
Yes, it does. I mean, for example, there are certain levels of severity in terms of behavioral changes. So, for example, many of our customers, what they'll do is every quarter they review the level of training and certification of the people on their side, the employees, and the third parties. And then we automatically create forms and questionnaires. So everything in the software is automated. So basically, as things change, forms are automatically populated. An email then is sent to the third party, and they then fill in the form and provide more information. And that triggers events in training tools, for example. But that's done on a periodic basis, because what you don't want to do is every day email your partner and say something. So you have to have it very, very planned and steady and robust. However, every 3 to 6 months, there is a list of companies that these companies want to audit and carry out, periodic due diligence with. So what we're doing there is helping populate that list. In other words, where is your greatest level of risk, and how do you balance what's changed and what comes up from the field with, the systematic approach you also have to regularly looking at your high-risk companies. And then again, that information is also put together in a form and sent to the business sponsor. So what we're trying to do is have it top-down, which is planned, but also have it bottomed up in terms of fine-tuning what's changed, and then populate that into an automatic form, which then a business sponsor can very quickly complete online. So the idea is you reduce the burden on compliance, but you also reduce the burden on your third party and your business sponsors, because if it's seen as cumbersome, it doesn't get used. So it's very important to make it, one-click reporting, one-click forms, and help the data that's ingested then bubble up to the compliance officer so they know at any one time what the risk profile of each region is and what they should be concerned about. So, as they report to the board, they can say, we have our plan, we're going through the plan, but the plan is also dynamic. And I think the plan being dynamic is a key, probably, change that we've seen from the DOJ since, let's say, December. The ability to respond to events rather than being rigid from day one.
Well, I've certainly advocated that, or at least speculated that the department is moving towards having additional or greater monitoring as a best practices. Part of that is transaction monitoring. Part of that is third-party monitoring. And then a third component of that I really see you guys filling in is this relationship monitoring. And having the ability to, we've talked about at length, look back, have a retrospective look back, but also use that in addition to detecting any corruption to help prevent that going forward. We don't have a screenshot up, but could you describe generally the type of report a compliance officer would get from the software product?
Yeah, so depending on the seniority of the compliance officer, they tend to look at reports on a region basis. So it will list all the companies in that region. They'll be ranked in order of activity. In other words, where are their people in China spending their time, and that ranking will change over time. You will see the rate of change also with these companies, because some companies you may reject, and you should see the level of activity drop off severely. And if it doesn't, we trigger an alert. For example, that means you've taken that partner off the books, but your people over there are still working with them. These trigger alerts. So there is a company level alert, and then there are other alerts that are quarterly or more often, which are training level alerts. There are transaction level alerts where people where clearly based on what's going on the ground, something else is going on. So really the compliance officer looks at this very high level picture of all the companies and has alerts at a high level, but also they're broken down company by company level. And when you click on the company, you can create a map and see who all the people are. You can see where the issue is, and you can right click and remediate that. And that whole process is audited and documented as well, so that you can see, what's left open and, how close are you to responding to the different alerts over time. So there's a tracking piece in there also.
Eddie, we're near the end of our time for this podcast, but I wanted to ask you to tell the people if they want to get in touch with you and find out more about Catelas, where do they go?
So I think a good place is our website. So the website is catelas.com, which is CATELAS.com. So CATELAS.com. And my name is Eddie Cogan. And by all means, Eddie.Cogan@catelas.com, EDDIE. Very happy to, answer any questions. And also, end of October, we're going to have a webinar, probably on the 29th of October, but the final date will be announced soon. And this is going to be all around risk monitoring and oversight. And, once you've onboarded a third party, how then do you manage the process going forward? How then do you better understand things that change and that sort of stuff? So the whole webinar is going to be around that. So as we populate that webinar, we'll update our website, but a placeholder will be October 29th, a webinar on risk monitoring.
Great. Well, look, I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and hope that we can visit again in the future. I think the tool that you guys have developed is going to be very useful and very important for the compliance practitioner moving forward. I regularly write on the monitoring component of compliance. I really think the DOJ is pointing towards that, and I think the Catelas software tool is going to be a key part of that going forward. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to visit with me and my audience today.
Excellent, Tom. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you.
Okay.